Her family forced her to marry her sister's millionaire groom. In a coma, the twist was shocking. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to our main character. The chapel was heavy with silence. Only the faint hum of the machines beside the hospital bed broke through the air. White lilies lined the aisle, but instead of a smiling groom waiting at the altar, there was a man lying unconscious, his body connected to wires and monitors. Adrian Carter, the youngest billionaire in the city, had been in a coma for months after a devastating car accident. And today, in front of witnesses who whispered with disbelief, he was being married. Ella Brooks's hands trembled as she clutched the bouquet. Her veil did little to hide the fear in her eyes. She had never dreamed of walking down an aisle like this. Not for her own love story, not for a man she had never even spoken to. Her parents' voices echoed in her ears from the night before. For the honor of our family, for the survival of all of us, you must take your sister's place. Her sister Sophia was supposed to be the bride. Sophia had been engaged to Adrian for almost a year, the union promising to tie their struggling family to a dynasty of wealth and security. But just weeks before the ceremony, Sophia disappeared. Rumors spread of her running away with another man, leaving behind a scandal that threatened to ruin the Brooks family's name. In desperation, their parents turned to Ella, the quiet daughter, the one who never disobeyed. Now she was here, forced into a gown that was not hers, standing before a man who could not even see her. The priest's voice rang out, solemn and unyielding. Do you, Ella Brooks, take Adrian Carter as your lawful husband, to have and to hold, in sickness and in health? Her throat closed, her lips parted, but no sound came out. She thought of her mother's frail hands clutching the hospital bed rails at home, the unpaid medical bills stacked high on the kitchen counter, the landlord's threats of eviction. The weight of her family's survival pressed down on her chest until it was hard to breathe. Finally, her voice cracked through the silence. I do. Gasps rippled through the small gathering of relatives and Carter family lawyers. The priest continued, pronouncing them husband and wife, though the man in the bed remained motionless, eyes closed, machines keeping him alive. A nurse slid the wedding ring onto Adrian's finger for her, the cool metal glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. Ella forced herself to meet her father's gaze at the back of the room. His nod was not of pride, but of grim necessity. To him, this was not a wedding. It was a transaction, a contract, a desperate attempt to hold on to dignity and security. When the ceremony ended, Ella found herself sitting alone at Adrian's bedside. The faint beeping of the heart monitor was the only response to her vows. She whispered under her breath, almost too softly for anyone to hear, I am your wife now, though you will never know me. But somewhere, deep inside the silence of the room, something seemed to stir. Adrian's hand twitched ever so slightly against the white sheets, a movement too small for anyone else to notice. Ella, lost in her thoughts, did not see it. Outside, the rain poured over the city, washing the streets in gray. Inside, a marriage had begun, one born not of love, but of obligation. And yet, fate had a way of turning what was false into something no one could have expected. This was not the end of Ella's story. It was only the beginning. The rain outside had not stopped when Ella returned to the mansion that evening. The Brooks family had been invited to stay for the first nights of her marriage, but in truth it was less an invitation and more an order from the Carter family's lawyers. Adrian's estate was a fortress of marble and glass, a house so vast that every step echoed like she was trespassing in a world that would never truly belong to her. Ella carried her small suitcase through the grand hall, her second-hand shoes squeaking against polished stone floors. Chandeliers glimmered overhead, 100 lights reflecting off crystal, but she felt only smaller under their glow. Every wall held portraits of men in tailored suits, generations of Carters staring down as though measuring her worth. She kept her eyes on the floor and followed the butler's stiff directions to the room prepared for her. It was not a bridal suite with petals and romance. It was a guest chamber, cold and immaculate, the kind of place where nothing looked touched by human life. She set her bag on the bed and sat, her hands shaking as the weight of the day settled on her shoulders. A marriage sealed with ink on a contract. A vow spoken before a man who could not even open his eyes. She whispered to herself, "This is not a marriage, this is a prison." Later that night, the family gathered in the dining hall. Ella walked in quietly, her gown replaced by a plain dress, her hair still damp from the storm. At the head of the table sat Mr. Brooks, her father, shoulders stiff with pride he did not earn. Across from him sat Mrs. Brooks, eyes gleaming with relief that her family's shame had been covered, at least for now. Between them were Carter family representatives, lawyers who spoke of documents, inheritance, and obligations, as if love had never been part of the conversation. Ella picked at her plate, unable to eat the delicacies arranged like artwork before her. Truffle risotto, rare steak, imported wine. She had grown up on canned soup and day-old bread. The richness on her tongue felt like ash. Her father's voice broke through. "You have done well, Ella. Our debts will be forgiven. Your mother's treatment will continue. You have secured the Brooks family's future." Ella's chest tightened. "At the cost of my life." She wanted to shout, but she bit down on her tongue until she tasted blood. After dinner, when the mansion grew quiet, Ella found herself wandering toward Adrian's room. The door was guarded by silence and the low beep of machines inside. She stepped closer, her hand brushing against the cold brass handle before she pushed it open. The sight was the same as at the wedding. Adrian lay motionless, chest rising and falling with mechanical rhythm. The wedding band shone faintly on his hand under the dim lamplight. Ella drew the chair closer and sat beside him. "You do not know me," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You were supposed to marry my sister. She ran away. And I was left to carry the burden. You are my husband now, even if you never wake to see me. What kind of marriage is that?" Her eyes stung with unshed tears, but she forced herself to keep speaking, if only to fill the unbearable silence. "I used to dream of painting," she said softly. "Colors and canvases were my escape. But those dreams do not pay the bills. Now I am here, tied to you, tied to your world, and I do not even know if you will ever hear me." She reached forward and adjusted the blanket on his chest, the way a nurse might for a patient. As her fingers brushed his wrist, she thought she felt the faintest twitch beneath the skin. Her breath caught, but when she looked again, his hand lay still as stone. Ella shook her head, scolding herself. "I am imagining things. You are not coming back." She leaned back in the chair, exhaustion weighing her down. The hum of machines filled the room as her eyelids grew heavy. But as sleep claimed her, Adrian's monitor spiked for a moment, a sharp rise in rhythm that no one witnessed. His lips parted, ever so slightly, as though some hidden part of him struggled to answer the vows spoken into the silence. For now, the world believed Adrian Carter was lost. Yet beside him sat the woman who had married him in chains of duty, unaware that fate had already begun to weave a very different ending. The morning after the wedding was gray and heavy, the storm still hanging over the Carter estate. Ella woke in her chamber with a dull ache in her chest, the kind of exhaustion that sleep could not cure. She had been dreaming of canvases and colors, only to open her eyes to a room that felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. A knock at the door startled her. The butler entered with a stack of papers pressed neatly in his hands. His expression was polite but cold, as though his every word had been scripted. "Mrs. Carter," he said, and the name felt foreign on her ears. "The lawyers have prepared the documents for your signature. You are expected in the study." Ella followed him down the endless hallways until they entered a vast room lined with dark oak shelves and leather-bound books. Around the polished desk sat two attorneys in gray suits, their pens poised like weapons. On the desk lay a thick file of papers with her name already typed across the front. One lawyer adjusted his glasses and spoke in a clipped tone. "As you are aware, this marriage is legally binding. However, given Mr. Carter's medical condition, we must establish guidelines. You will remain in residence at the Carter estate. You will not make financial decisions outside of approved expenses. You will attend public functions if called upon, but your presence is otherwise restricted to this property. Any breach of these terms will void the settlement promised to your family." Ella stared at the papers, the words blurred together into chains that tightened around her throat. She looked up at them, her voice trembling. "And what What if he never wakes? The lawyer's eyes did not soften. Then, Mrs. Carter, you will continue as his legal spouse until his passing. Upon his death, you will receive the compensation agreed upon in the prenuptial arrangements. Until then, you are his wife in name and duty. Her hand shook as she took the pen. For a moment, she thought of running, of tearing the papers apart, of shouting that she was no prisoner. But then she remembered her mother's face, pale and tired, the hospital bills stacked high on the kitchen table. She pressed the pen to the page and signed her name, each stroke feeling like another piece of her freedom slipping away. When the lawyers finally left, Ella lingered in the study. The rain streaked down the tall windows, blurring the view of the garden outside. She whispered into the silence, "I never chose this, but I will survive it." Later that afternoon, she made her way once again to Adrian's room. The nurses had already completed their rounds, but the atmosphere was still heavy with antiseptic and quiet beeping. She sat down by his side, the contract still weighing on her mind. "I signed my name today," she murmured, resting her chin on her hand. "Now it is official. I am your wife, but I feel more like a shadow than a person. Do you even know? Can you hear me?" She leaned closer, her fingers brushing over his hand. It was warm beneath her touch, and that small detail startled her. For the first time, she noticed that his color had returned faintly, as though life had begun to stir within him. Her heart pounded. She bent down and whispered, "If you can hear me, give me a sign. Anything." For a long moment, nothing moved. The monitors ticked on, indifferent to her plea. She sighed and closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. But just as she was about to pull away, Adrian's fingers twitched against her palm, faint but undeniable. Ella gasped. "Adrian?" she whispered. Her eyes darted to his face, but his expression remained still, his eyelids closed. She sat frozen, uncertain if she had imagined it, yet the echo of that touch lingered in her skin. Her breathing quickened as she pressed her hand firmly over his. "I am here," she whispered. "Even if you never open your eyes, I will stay." In the hallway beyond, servants whispered rumors of the new bride and her silent husband. Some called her a saint for enduring the burden. Others accused her of chasing wealth under the mask of duty. Ella heard their voices when she walked past, each word cutting deep. But inside Adrian's chamber, she felt a strange comfort, as though her presence mattered to him in some hidden way. That night, as she left his room, she glanced back one last time. The monitors pulsed steady, but his lips seemed to part as though struggling for breath. It was a fragile, fleeting sign, but to Ella it meant everything. She whispered into the dark, "Maybe you are not as lost as everyone believes." Outside, the storm finally began to break, and a faint streak of sunlight pressed through the clouds, lighting the path ahead. For the first time since the wedding, Ella felt the whisper of something she had not dared to hope for possibility. The days that followed blurred into a strange routine. Each morning, Ella would wake in the cold guest chamber, dress herself in borrowed clothing that never felt like hers, and walk down the endless halls to Adrian's room. The staff barely looked at her. To them, she was not truly a bride, only an obligation bound by paper and the Carter family name. Yet in the quiet of that room, where the machines hummed and the curtains softened the daylight, Ella began to feel something unexpected connection. She would read aloud from books she found in the Carter library, her voice steady, even as her heart trembled. Sometimes she told him about her past, about working double shifts at the diner to help pay her mother's hospital bills, about sketching flowers in the margins of old notebooks when she could not afford canvas. She laughed softly at herself, confessing dreams that felt foolish in the shadow of his wealth. "I used to imagine having a small studio of my own," she whispered one afternoon, smoothing the blanket on his chest. "Not much, just a place with good light and quiet. But those dreams belong to someone else now. I belong here." More than once she thought she saw his fingers shift when she spoke. At first she convinced herself it was only her imagination, but the more she stayed by his side, the more convinced she became that some part of Adrian was listening, hidden behind the veil of silence. One evening, the estate hosted a gathering for business partners. Though Adrian lay in a coma, the Carter family needed to show strength, to prove that their empire was unshaken. Ella was summoned to attend, dressed in a gown chosen by the staff. When she stepped into the grand ballroom, Whispers trailed her like smoke. Guests glanced at her with curiosity, some with pity, some with scorn. "That is the stand, in bride," someone murmured behind a glass of champagne. "Married a man who cannot even open his eyes. A desperate family's move." "Or a clever one," another voice cut in. "She will inherit everything if he dies." Ella held her head high, but inside her chest burned. She had not chosen this life, yet every gaze painted her as a schemer. At the long table, she sat quietly, answering polite questions with brief replies. She felt like an imposter wearing another woman's crown. Halfway through the evening, one of the Carter cousins leaned close, his tone mocking. "Tell me, Mrs. Carter, what is it like being married to a ghost?" Laughter rippled through the table. Heat flushed her cheeks, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of a retort. Instead, she excused herself and slipped away to Adrian's room, her heels echoing against the marble corridor. Inside, the silence wrapped around her like a shield. She collapsed into the chair beside his bed and whispered fiercely, "They think I am nothing. They think I am here to steal from you, but I am here because I had no choice. Do you understand? Do you?" Her voice broke. She pressed her forehead against his hand, tears soaking the sheets. And then there it was, a faint squeeze, so slight she almost doubted it. Her head shot up, eyes wide. Adrian's eyelids fluttered, the barest hint of movement. The monitor quickened, beeping louder in the dim light. Ella gasped, clutching his hand. "Adrian? Can you hear me?" She held her breath, waiting for more. But his eyes remained closed, the flutter gone, leaving only stillness. The nurse rushed in moments later, adjusting the monitors. "His brain activity is increasing," she said with surprise. "It is unusual. Perhaps your presence is reaching him." The words struck Ella like a spark in the dark. She sat straighter, her hand never leaving his. For the first time since the day she was forced into this marriage, she felt something more than duty hope. That night, she returned to her room and sat by the window, staring at the estate gardens below. She whispered to herself, "Maybe he is not lost. Maybe he is fighting his way back." The thought frightened her and thrilled her at once. Far across the estate, the Carter lawyers continued drafting contracts and making plans, confident that Adrian Carter's empire would remain under their control. They did not know that the man they considered nearly gone had just shown the first fragile sign of return. And they did not know that the quiet woman they dismissed, as nothing was about to become the reason their world would change forever. In the stillness of that mansion, beneath the weight of money and silence, a bond was forming born not of love at first sight, but of care, resilience, and whispered words spoken into the dark. It was a bond that would alter both of their lives in ways neither family could predict. The following morning began with a knock on Ella's door. A nurse entered with a file in her hands, her expression bright with news. "Mrs. Carter," she said gently, "the doctors ran new tests overnight. Your husband's neural activity has increased significantly. They believe he may be responding to external stimuli." Ella's heart skipped. She remembered the moment she felt Adrian's hand squeeze hers, the flicker of life that no one else seemed to witness. She followed the nurse down the long hallway, her steps faster than usual, until they entered the private suite. Adrian lay as he always had, still and pale, but something felt different. His breathing was steadier, his skin warmer. For the first time, Ella allowed herself to hope that he might come back. She sat by his side, her fingers brushing against his. "I know you are in there," she whispered. "If you can hear me, keep fighting. I will be here." Hours passed as she stayed with him, reading from one of his books. She chose a volume of poetry, her voice soft in the sterile room. She did not know if he could hear the words, but she spoke them anyway, letting each line carry her own longing. When she paused to wipe her eyes, she swore she saw his lips tremble, as though trying to form a sound. By afternoon, visitors arrived. Business associates came to discuss contracts with the lawyers. Ella was summoned briefly to stand beside them, her presence a reminder that the Carter legacy was still intact. She endured their stares, the way their eyes slid over her, like she was an accessory, not a woman. They spoke of stock shares, board meetings, and public image, never once mentioning Adrian as a person, only as an empire they intended to control. After the meeting, Ella escaped back to his side. The contrast struck her sharply out there. He was nothing but power and wealth to be protected. In here, lying motionless, he was simply a man clinging to life. She pressed her palm over his hand and whispered, "You are not their property, and I am not their pawn. Maybe they see me as nothing, but I see you. I see the man behind all of this." That night, when the mansion grew quiet, she returned again. The staff eyed her curiously, whispering as she passed. "She spends all her time with him," one said. "Perhaps she thinks he can hear." Another laughed. "Perhaps she is just rehearsing her role as a widow-to-be." Ella ignored them. She closed the door of Adrian's chamber and sank into the chair. "They think I am waiting for you to die," she murmured, "but I am waiting for you to live." Her hand lingered over his, and for the second time, she felt the faintest movement of his fingers curling toward her palm. Her eyes filled with tears. She leaned close, her voice trembling. "Adrian, if you can hear me, hold on. I will not leave you." The monitor beeped faster, the rhythm sharp and clear in the quiet room. Ella gasped, pressing the call button for the nurse. Staff rushed in, adjusting the machines. The doctor's voice was calm but astonished. "This is extraordinary. His brain is waking." Ella stood aside, her heart racing, while they ran tests. When the room emptied again, she returned to the chair, unable to look away from him. "You are coming back," she whispered. "You are really coming back." As dawn broke, light spilled across the bed. Adrian's eyelids fluttered once, twice, before settling again. It was not consciousness yet, but it was more than anyone had seen in months. Ella covered her mouth with both hands, overwhelmed by the fragile miracle unfolding before her eyes. She leaned down, her voice steady now. "I do not know why fate put me here, but I will not abandon you. Whatever happens, we will face it together." Beyond the chamber doors, the Carter family continued their schemes, unaware that the man they thought would remain silent forever had already begun to stir. And they had no idea that the quiet woman they dismissed as insignificant had just become the anchor pulling him back into life. The world outside believed this marriage was only paper and duty, but inside that room, in the stillness of each breath and heartbeat, something real was beginning to take shape. It was not yet love, but it was stronger than obligation. It was the first fragile thread of connection that neither contract nor wealth could explain. The following week was unlike anything Ella had known since the day she was forced into marriage. Each morning she entered Adrian's chamber with her heart in her throat, wondering if this would be the day his eyes finally opened. His doctors spoke cautiously, warning that recovery from such a deep coma could take time, but the small changes were undeniable. His hands twitched more often, his breathing grew stronger, and sometimes when she read to him, his head seemed to shift as though listening. Ella never told anyone about the private vows she whispered when they were alone. She told him about her mother's fragile health, about the sketchbook she hid under her pillow as a girl, and about the crushing weight of being forced into someone else's destiny. She confessed her fear of being seen as a fraud, of being called a fortune hunter when in truth she had signed her life away to save her family. Every time she spoke, the monitors responded as if her words reached him in places no one else could. One evening, as the sun bled gold across the mansion gardens, Ella sat beside him and brushed a damp cloth over his forehead. Her hand lingered longer than necessary, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "You do not know me," she whispered, "but I am learning you in this silence. If you return to the world, I want you to know I did not come here for wealth. I came because I had no choice, but staying, that is my choice now." It was then that it happened. His eyelids fluttered, and for the briefest moment his eyes opened. They were dark and sharp, clouded by confusion, but undeniably alive. Ella froze, breath caught in her chest. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice trembling. His lips parted, a hoarse sound escaping, too weak to form a word. Tears filled her eyes. She reached for the call button, and soon doctors and nurses filled the room, surrounding him with urgent commands. He was not fully awake yet, slipping back into stillness under their care. But the proof had been there. He was fighting. He was returning. When the staff left, Ella remained at his side, her heart racing. She leaned closer and whispered fiercely, "You found me. Even for a second, you found me." Her hand stayed wrapped around his as she cried quietly, not out of sorrow but out of relief. The following days became a blur of cautious hope. Adrian's eyes opened more often, sometimes for only moments, sometimes long enough to watch her as she read. His lips formed fragments of sound, the beginning of words. The doctors encouraged patience, but Ella saw something more in his gaze. She saw recognition. One afternoon, when the house was unusually quiet, she returned to his room with her sketchbook. She had not drawn in months, but something urged her to bring it. She sat beside his bed and began to sketch his face, the lines softened by illness but still strong. When she looked up, she found his eyes open, watching her hand move across the page. A faint sound escaped his lips, rough but clear enough to hear, "Why?" She dropped the pencil, stunned. "Why what?" she asked, leaning close. His lips trembled again. "Why?" "Stay?" Her throat tightened. She reached for his hand and whispered, "Because you are not alone. Because someone has to believe in you, even if you cannot believe in yourself." Tears burned her eyes as his gaze lingered on her, filled with questions he could not yet speak. But in that moment, Ella knew the truth. Adrian Carter was coming back, and he had chosen to return not to wealth or empire, but to the sound of her voice and the weight of her presence. For the first time since she stepped into the Carter estate, Ella felt that her life was not just a borrowed role in someone else's story. It was becoming her own. And though the world still whispered that she was nothing but a placeholder bride, Adrian's awakening gaze told her something different. To him, she was real. She was the anchor that pulled him out of the darkness. The mansion still loomed cold and watchful. The lawyers still circled with their contracts. But in that quiet chamber, something unshakable was forming. It was fragile, unfinished, but it was alive like Adrian himself. And for Ella, that fragile truth was stronger than any chain her family had placed upon her. The news of Adrian's gradual awakening spread through the Carter estate faster than wildfire. For days, the staff who once whispered dismissively about Ella now lingered outside the chamber, straining to catch glimpses of movement or fragments of words. Business associates who had already begun circling like vultures were suddenly anxious. If Adrian returned, their plans of seizing control would crumble. But not everyone welcomed the change. Late one afternoon, when Ella stepped out of the room to fetch water, she found Sophia standing in the hallway. Her sister, the woman who had abandoned her place at the altar, had returned draped in luxury, her eyes gleaming with calculation. "Well," Sophia said smoothly, "you have done quite well, Ella. You married into the Carters, you have lived in their mansion, and now you sit at his bedside, pretending to be the devoted wife. Do you really think anyone believes this act?" Ella's chest tightened. "I never asked for this," she whispered. "You left, and I was forced." "Forced?" Sophia laughed sharply. "Do not play the victim. You always wanted more than your small life. Do not tell me you are not enjoying the thought of inheriting billions if he never truly wakes." Ella's eyes burned, but she stood her ground. "I do not want his money. I want him to live. That is the difference between us." Sophia's smirk faded as the sound of shuffling footsteps echoed from within the room. Both women turned. Adrian's voice, weak but undeniable, broke the silence. "Who? Are you?" Sophia rushed forward, smoothing her dress, her voice sugary sweet. "Adrian, darling, it is me, Sophia, your fiancé." But Adrian's gaze, hazy with effort, shifted past her to Ella. His lips trembled as he whispered, "My wife." The word struck the air like a blade. Sophia's expression darkened instantly. She turned on Ella, her voice dripping venom. "You told him, did you not? You manipulated him while he was helpless." "Oh, I told him nothing," Ella said firmly, though her hands shook. "He chose those words himself." The tension snapped when the Carter lawyers entered, summoned by the noise. Sophia wasted no time spinning her tale, claiming Ella had schemed from the start, that she had trapped Adrian in a fraudulent marriage for wealth. The lawyers exchanged wary looks. The scandal of a substitute bride could destroy the family's reputation if revealed. Ella's heart pounded. For the first time, she realized that the fragile trust she had begun to build with Adrian could be shattered before it truly began. If he believed Sophia's lies, everything would collapse. Adrian's weak voice cut through again, halting but resolute. "Enough. His gaze turned toward Ella, his fingers twitching against the sheet. She stayed. The room fell silent. His words were not long, not strong, but they carried the weight of truth. Sophia's lips parted in fury, but she had no answer. Ella stepped closer, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. I stayed because I could not leave. Not for money, not for your name, for you. Adrian's eyes met hers, and though exhaustion pulled him back into silence, the message was clear. A line had been drawn. But Ella knew the battle was far from over. Sophia would not surrender easily, and the lawyers had their own agendas. The quiet bond she shared with Adrian was about to be tested by forces determined to tear it apart. The confrontation in the ballroom changed everything. From that day forward, the whispers about Ella began to fade. No one could deny the sight of Adrian standing, fragile yet determined, declaring her as his wife in front of them all. The empire that once treated her as an outsider now had to face the truth. She had been the one to keep him alive when the rest of the world had already counted him as lost. Sophia left the mansion in fury, her plans shattered. The lawyers, stripped of their leverage, retreated to silence. For the first time since she entered this world of marble and shadows, Ella felt the air grow lighter. Weeks passed, and Adrian's strength returned with each day. He began physical therapy in the mansion gardens, leaning on a cane while Ella walked beside him. There were days when his frustration boiled over, when his body refused to obey his will. But every time, Ella was there, steady and patient. One step at a time, she whispered, her hand resting over his. And slowly, he did. One evening, he invited her to the gallery that had been closed for years. The staff had cleaned and lit the space at his request. Ella stepped inside and gasped. Every wall was lined with her sketches, the drawings she had made in secret during her quiet nights. Adrian had gathered them, framed them, and turned the gallery into an exhibition titled The Art of Ella Carter. Her hands trembled as she looked around, tears blurring her vision. You did this? For me? Adrian's voice was steady, no longer the frail whisper she had first heard. You gave me life when I was nothing but a shadow. You stayed when everyone else left. This is my way of showing the world who you truly are. He stepped closer, reaching into his pocket. In his palm lay the same ring that had once been slipped onto his finger by a nurse in a cold hospital ceremony. He held it now with new meaning. Ella Brooks Carter, you were forced to marry me once. Today, I ask you to choose me freely. Will you marry me? Not for duty, but for love. Ella's tears fell freely as she nodded. Yes. 1,000 times. Yes. The mansion that had once been a prison erupted with joy as their voices echoed through the gallery. The marriage that began as a contract ended as a true vow, sealed not by wealth or obligation, but by choice. And so, the story of a forced bride and a silent groom became something no one could have predicted. A love stronger than fear, stronger than lies, and stronger than fate itself.